Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are Beacon Technologies. I am Andrea Cole. I'm the VP of the Digital Optimization Team, which means that we handle schema and SEO for a lot of clients. And so we have a unique vantage point understanding how it affects the marketing. And then I'll let Keana introduce herself, but she'll talk about how she interacts with schema.
Hi, I'm Keana Massey. I'm the VP of UX Design and Development at Beacon. Our team is going to be helping with the implementation side of Schema, so looking at Cascade CMS and how you can dynamically integrate that into your CMS structure.
So, our presentation today is structured for discovery, pirate scheme implementation in Cascade CMS. So, we're going to go over both the impact of AI and schema, but at a deeper level, we're going to go over how you actually implement that into Cascade and actually set it up. So, but kicking us off, just starting to really talk and understand about what is happening in the search landscape. With the introduction of AI being seen organically in what we term the free listings, is not just about ranking for one of those blue links anymore. Traditional search still matters by a huge margin. It delivers the majority of organic traffic and visibility still. But AI is growing, especially because it's delivering instant answers and especially for younger generations. So, with that, AI does use more heavily certain traditional features of SEO, such as structured data, which we're talking about today, entity clarity, and explicit EEAT signals, which is a term used a lot in SEO. And it really just talks about how Google sees your site as an experienced provider, someone that has expertise, someone that is authoritativeness, and someone that can be trusted. And structured data is one of a few things that aid into those signals that make you feel more trustworthy and experienced and aid into EEAT. So, talking a little bit more about generative engine optimization, which has been the term coined for when you're optimizing for AI. GEO, Geo, that's generally how people discuss that. And then SEO, so search engine optimization, the traditional type of thing that you're going to do to get seen in Google, Bing, and other search engines. So, Geo, it's AI-driven optimizations. So, you're focusing on getting your site surfaced as a answer to a prompt or answers to a prompt on things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Perplexity, and this includes both like within the platform. So in the case of Chat and Gemini, where you actually have a platform you're in, it's being seen in there. But also it's being seen on now the Google kind of like answered AI results within search engines too. So it's a space that's shared both in and outside of the traditional search result page. SEO is really just talking specifically about Google and Bing, and it's the results that are coming after, anything, any of the local results, the shopping or the paid ads. That's the traditional SEO, the search engine results. So looking at geo, you're really focusing kind of to what I was mentioning before on authority. Schema is huge, which is kind of why we're talking about it today. It's one of the single biggest things that you can actually do and control. Semantic clarity, how things relate to each other, and citation-worthy content. It's having good content that's basically people want to link to and share and they find useful. Search engine optimization is really focused more on keywords, backlinks, technical SEO, and then usability signals, things like time on site. Are they staying? Are they clicking things? Are they engaging? Um, and then the goals. So the goals here are slightly different. So Geo is really more about being seen. There really isn't a ranking structure with Geo. You ask a question and then there's an answer. And so It's more about coming up in those answers, or even when there's like a series of answers, when there are reference links provided. That's the type of goal that you're going for with generative engine optimization. SEO is traffic, driving traffic by ranking pages and search results. It's a traffic driver. And that's also a key difference where geo, it's more of a visibility thing. You know, you may or may not actually get someone to click on that link, but you've made an introduction to your site. Search engine optimization is some of that, but a lot of that still is traffic coming into your site that can be measured. So, kind of talking a little bit more about the similarities and differences. So, similarities, both, you know, geo and SEO, they both work off of, to a degree, AI and algorithms and machine learning. So, technical accessibility and crawlability, like can they get to your site? You know, are they being blocked? Is certain content pages hard to get to? Those are things that are going to make it hard for any engine, whether it's something that's doing SEO or geo to find content. So that's an area that overlaps between the two. Um, Performance, so like refining strategy, improving SEO outcomes, you know, measuring rank and traffic, and geo has AI answer visibility, citation, and brands, but you can measure those things. So they're both measurable to a certain degree. Geo's becoming more measurable. It's still kind of difficult to measure those specifically. Um, but there is kind of measurement there, especially when you have the answers coming up in a Google search about your visibility in the AI results. So structured information and clarity also really important for the two for the same reasons that technical accessibility and crawlability are important. You know, they are not they are they're computers. I mean, they have to go in, their content has to be structured in a certain way for them to figure it out. Over the years, they've become better and better about weeding through the gray areas, but they don't like it. And that's kind of what Schema is aiming to remove is any gray areas. And then there's continuous adaptation. Um, you know, Google regularly rolls out algorithm updates a couple times a year. AI models update, I mean, lightning fast now. There's always something new coming out. So um, the needle is always moving. The general principles stay the same, but how smart those principles are and you know what they can get past will change. So it's kind of why SEO and geo are a continuous strategy. You don't do it and then you're done. It's a continual thing that you update. And then the difference is here. So, you know, SEO is really focused on keywords and competitors and the search landscape. And then geo is prompts and, you know, citation patterns, which are just linking patterns between pages on your site, between your site and others, and then how you structure and answer questions and information. Content formatting. So when it comes to SEO content, we're talking about content that's both on the page and in structured data, but the on-page stuff has to be formatted for humans. Um, Geo formats that really are impactful, like Schema, are machine first, not so much user first. So, you know, looking at how that's formatted on the back end more than what it's formatted on the front end. And then algorithm updates versus model evolution. So I mentioned they continuously adapt, and they both do, but the rate of those are drastically different between traditional search algorithms and the AI models. Like I mentioned, AI models change, you know, rapidly. I mean, we're talking about, you know, monthly and sometimes weekly, whereas the big changes for, say, a Google algorithm are now, you know, 3 to 4 times a year. So the plane you're working on for geo changes much more rapidly than SEO does. And so getting now into Schema, because that's kind of the topic of today's discussion, and really the first, if you're going to, you know, start really focusing on this as an optimization, which we think everyone should, Schema is the place that you start. So what is Schema? Schema is just structured data. It is code on the back end that lets you structure content so that AI systems and search engines can understand it. Not just like, you know, textually, like going through and reading content on the page and kind of making inferences. Schema slash structured data is giving very specific, clear instructions on what the content is with no inference required. So basically, it's translating web content into machine readable entities and relationships, which we'll go over more deeply once we get into the actual technical components. And it also enhances search features such as rich results. So this is a traditional SEO thing. You'll see that in a Google search result, knowledge panel also, and then AI citations. So again, going back to like you do schema and you're greatly improving your visibility in generative engines, but you're also improving your visibility in traditional engines too. Um, so the impact on this is that it increases the findability of your content. It makes it clear who you are, what you offer, connects concepts between things, reduces ambiguity, and then it increases the likelihood that you are going to be understood, trusted, referenced in AI generative answers, which improves that EEAT signals we talked about previously. That's important for traditional search as well. And I think the kind of little visuals at the bottom really kind of help explain where structured data really like aligns things and it's clear versus unstructured data, or basically not having structured data on your site. The site content is, and your site is kind of like a collection of pages that, if you've done a really good job planning your content structure out and on-page content and the hierarchy of your site, it gives good signals, but it's never going to be as tightly wound as structured data signals will provide. So, why is this really important for higher education? Higher education sites, they're big, they've got lots of content. There are lots of stakeholders and content owners in that. And so you've got a lot of hands in the pot. Schema is going to help search engines weed through a lot of those things that occur and hurdles that happen just because of the site type that would be hard otherwise. So doing so improves search visibility. Obviously that is huge, especially because it's how a lot of users are going to find you. It boosts the AI-driven results. So younger generations are using AI much more heavily, and so that's where your target audiences mainly are. And so that's how you get seen there is using schema on the site. And then enhances those trust and authority signals, which will help with AI visibility as well as traditional search. And so, it's really the forefront. And if you're going to start worrying and working on AI visibility, schema's the way to go. And I will say too, there is another session put on by Bruce at Digital Wave that really goes into a lot of the content and marketing side of schema much more deeply than we did here today on this first part, which I think would complement your kind of deep dive into schema if you're going that route, which I think you should. So that's a good follow-up presentation to also review in addition to what we're going into today, since we're going to go into also some of the more technical implementation, and Bruce goes much higher level, more content and like marketing type focus. And then the last piece before I hand it over to Keana to talk about the technical components and kind of taking this, back to the much higher level view. The search landscape is extremely competitive, not just because it keeps changing and we have new things to start worrying about, like being seen in AI engines, just because the pool of prospects in higher education is becoming smaller, which increases competition. So, you've got that piece to also start to think through. There's generational shifts happening. People are viewing college less favorably. There's, the higher costs and interest rates. People are more in touch with political, economic, social, environmental statuses. They are evaluating brand reputation for academic programs and career readiness. So, there is the kind of mindset of you just go to a 2 4 year school after you graduate high school is being questioned more than it ever has before, and there are also more options than there ever have been before. So that's when using emerging technologies and things like AI and SEO and really become more important to be more in control there because there is that shift happening. So that's just another component to this. I'm sure this is not new news. Everyone in this vertical understands this is going on in higher education, but it does help kind of, well, it doesn't, it compresses the urgency to make these changes sooner and faster to better compete in this current market.
All right. Well, let's jump in now and start talking about the more technical side. And let's start talking about how we actually add structured data to a website. So there are three ways that we can look at adding structured data to the website. There is the JSON LD method, microdata, and then the RDFA. So all three approaches do kind of the same core job. They add machine readable meaning to your content so that search engines and crawlers can really understand what your page is and not just what it looks like. You can kind of think of these as three different styles of just labeling your HTML with extra meaning. But let's look at the first one, which is JSON LD. In almost every modern project, you should be using the JSON LD method. JSON LD is really just structured data that is written as pure JSON inside of a script tag. What makes it really great is that it's completely separate from your HTML. So instead of just sprinkling attributes all over your markup, you can keep everything very clean and centralized. And Google really explicitly recommends this. It's easier to generate dynamically with frameworks like React or Next.js, and it's much easier to read, test, and maintain. And because it doesn't touch your DOM structure, there's almost zero risk of it breaking your layout. So if you really are looking at this for SEO or you're building anything as a modern site, JSON LD is really the clear winner for structuring your data. Next is the microdata, which is kind of an older approach. Instead of a script block, this is where you add attributes like item scope, item type, or item prop directly into your HTML elements. This does work fine and search engines still support it, but your markup gets a little messier. It becomes a lot harder to refactor and harder to reuse components. And this is not a very dynamic or component-based approach. So think of kind of microdata as acceptable, but a little bit more dated. It's mostly useful if you're just working with very simple or static HTML or maintaining a legacy system. And then finally, we have RDFA, which this is the most powerful and expressive option, but it's also the most complex. It's built on RDF and the semantic web world. So it's great for really rich interconnected data models and things like academic or government data sets. But for normal websites and SEO, it's a bit overkill. It's harder to learn. It's easier to break. So unless you're very specifically building a linked data, it's really just not usually worth the extra complexity. So from an SEO perspective, it's pretty straightforward that Google prefers JSON LD, and most documentation tools assume that JSON LD and rich results examples are most always JSON LD as well. So although all technically the three can work, JSON LD is definitely the path to go. So let's break down JSON LD into the three core building blocks. At first, it can look a little intimidating, but it's actually very simple. Every JSON LD object really comes down to just three ideas: the context, type, and properties. So first is context. This is what's going to tell your search engines which vocabulary that you are using, which is most of the time that is schema.org. So think of this as setting the dictionary or language for your data. It tells Google how you're going to interpret the words that you're going to be using. And without the context, the fields don't really have a standardized meaning. Next is type. This simply says what kind of thing that you are describing. So this can be an article, a product, a person, or an event. So the context, if the context is the dictionary, the type is the label on the object. It defines exactly what the thing actually is. And then finally, you have your properties. This is where you describe the details, things like headline, author, price, publish date, rating, whatever makes sense for that type. And these are more standardized fields that are defined by schema.org. So search engines know exactly what each one means. So once you understand these three pieces, reading and writing JSON LD becomes pretty straightforward. It's just describing your page in a more machine-friendly way. So now that we understand how this works structurally, the next question is what kinds of things should we actually mark up? That's where schema.org types come in. Think of these as really predefined labels that tell the search engine exactly what each page represents. So for higher education sites, there are really common patterns. So instead of just using one generic web page type everywhere, we can be much more specific. And that really helps search engines to better understand, categorize, and then also sometimes enhance our content and results. So for example, if you have a homepage or your main institutional site would typically use the college or university type, your department or school pages would fall under your educational organization. Individual course details pages would fall under the course type. And then full degree or certificate programs would use that educational occupational program. We know that events are also another big one for higher education. So things like campus tours, open houses, webinars, or lectures should all use the event type. Your faculty or staff profiles would use person. And then FAQ sections, such as the FAQ pages, would use the FAQ page. These can trigger rich results in search. And then blog posts or research articles or news updates would use the article type. And then, of course, we have some broader structural types, such as organization for institutional information, like accreditation or about pages. And then you use your web page for those general content that doesn't really fit anywhere else. And then also, breadcrumb lists are really good to help search engines understand your site hierarchy. So really the main idea here is to be as specific as possible. The more accurately that you can describe the page type, the better search engines can really interpret it, and the more likely you are to qualify for rich results or enhanced visibility. So instead of thinking, compiler says web page, think of what is this page actually about, a course, a person, event, or a program, and then use that schema type to describe it. So up until this point, we've really talked about what JSON LD is and which schema types to use. Now let's talk about how you actually implement this into Cascade CMS. The goal is really simple here. We want a consistent place in our templates where structured data can live. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a region within your page template. This region could be called just structured data. You could add it to any template that's tied to your page content types. This is kind of your dedicated slot that's going to hold all of your JSON LD. And we're separating it out so that authors don't mix it up, the structured data with any visible content. The preferred location for this is inside the head tag. That keeps the structured data very clean and predictable and separate from the page layout. If that's not possible, you can also place it before the closing body tag, which is still acceptable. We just want to avoid putting this inside of any visible content areas like the main body or sidebar. That just really clutters your templates and makes maintenance a lot harder. Search engines will read the JSON LD anywhere in the HTML, so technically it doesn't matter where this lives structurally, but putting it in the head just keeps everything very organized and consistent across pages. So it's easier for developers to find, it's easier to debug, and it's less likely to break anything. So once we've added our structured data region to the template, what we want to do is actually start generating some of the schema. So in Cascade, we're going to use that using velocity formats. The first thing that we're going to do is just to get us started, we're just going to create a blank velocity format. This is going to be the output for the JSON LD. So we're not going to be rendering any HTML. We're just going to be producing that structured data. And then you can attach those formats to that new structured data region using your configuration sets. And that's going to let Cascade automatically apply the right schema depending on the page type. So instead of one giant file, we're just going to create smaller purpose-built formats. So for example, we may have a homepage schema format, a faculty directory, or a news listing format, an article format, or an FAQs, or we may even have a generic standard page fallback format. So each one of these outputs the schema that makes sense for that specific content type. And then on a more important note, the index boxes are optional. So you're really only going to need to generate an index box if you're doing things like news listings or faculty directories. If the page is just describing itself, you don't need to have one. So now that we've added the region and created our velocity formats, step 3 is really about figuring out what actually feeds that schema. So what content fields from your data definitions are going to power this structured data? So what we want to do is we want to map directly to the fields that your editors are already filling out in Cascade. So this step is really just about connecting your data definition fields to your JSON LD properties. We don't want to create extra content if we don't have to. We simply just want to structure the content that already exists. So if we take a look at this from a news article, if we're using the article schema type, we already have most of what we need. The title becomes the headline, the release date becomes the date published, the featured image becomes the image, and the teaser or summary can become the description. So nothing new is really being written here. We're just translating all existing fields into standardized schema properties that search engines will understand. Another great example of this is the FAQs. So if you have a dedicated FAQ field or an accordion component with questions and answers, those can map out perfectly to the FAQ page schema, where each of the headline or titles of your accordion can become a question, and each of the accordion content areas become the answer. So this is exactly the type of content that can trigger those rich results in Google. The expandable FAQ results you can see directly in search. And then finally, this also works really well for the faculty or staff profile pages. So you can create people pages with the faculty and staff profiles. So using a person schema type, you can map out fields like your name, job title, department, photo, biography, and your contact information. All that information already exists within your Cascade CMS data definitions and your content model. So we're just simply going to label those in a way that helps search engines understand what this page represents, that it's a real person connected to your institution. So really, the schema should reflect your content model. If your data definitions are clean and structured, your schema becomes really easy and almost automatic. And we're just really mapping out and connecting the content that you already have to that structured that the search engine expects. So we've mostly talked about schema for individual pages like the article, a person, or an FAQ, but there's also ways to do your listing pages, things like news indexes, event calendars, and faculty directories, or your program listings. These pages don't just describe one item, they describe a collection. So the approach is a little bit different here. For listing pages, we don't want a hard code schema for every item. Instead, we really want to generate it dynamically. So this means that we're going to be pulling the content the same way that the pages already do, using that index box or query, and we want to build the schema automatically from those results. The process is pretty straightforward. First, you pull items using the index box or query. Then inside of your velocity format, you're just going to loop through those results. And for each item that you you're going to output structured data dynamically. So instead of manually writing schema, the system is really building it out at time of publish for you. Typically, we would use something like the item list schema. That lets us describe the page as a list and define each entry with properties like position, name, and URL. This is going to allow search engines to really understand both the page and the relationship between the items on it. So the big idea here is that your content is dynamic and your schema should also be dynamic too. So we're going to build it once in Velocity and let Cascade generate it for every listing page moving forward. That way your listing stays really accurate, scalable, and maintenance free. Not every scenario is going to really fit neatly into content types. That's why we want to have a fallback strategy as well. The solution is really simple. We just add a dedicated structured data field to our data definition. This is really just a backup or safety net. So if a page doesn't have a specific schema format, we can still manually add structured data when needed. This is just a plain text field area that we've incorporated into the data definition. It allows editors or developers to paste valid JSON LD directly into it. And then our templates just output whatever is in that field into the structured data region. So it flows through the page exactly like our automated schema would. This is just really useful for unique pages or special campaigns or one-off landing pages, or if you're just testing new schema types before fully templating them. So basically anything that doesn't justify building a full template, it's important to just have this fallback region. So this is where we actually start to wire everything together. Step 4 is taking that finished JSON LD example and putting it into our velocity formats and just making them dynamic. So what we do is we typically paste the completed JSON LD script into the velocity format and then start to replace any hard-coded values with variables from Cascade. So instead of using that static title or date, we're pulling directly from the data definition fields and then making the schema automatic and reusable. Next, we'll add a little bit of logic as well. If the fallback structured data field is filled out, we'll use that, but otherwise we'll generate the dynamic schema. So manual always is going to override automatic when needed. This is also a part that kind of trips people up is cleaning and escaping the data. Schema has to be extremely strict JSON. So we escape IDs and variables and strip out HTML from the WYSIWYG content, like the FAQ answers, and just remove anything that could break the format. This could be extra quotes or line breaks or carriage returns. And really just even one stray character can invalidate the whole block. So we want to make sure that we include that in our velocity code. There's also a few formatting rules to keep in mind. URLs should match exactly what's in the browser and your canonical tags. The dates should follow ISO 8601, so year, month, day. And if a field is empty, you want to just remove that entirely instead of outputting a blank string. So really, this is just about producing that clean JSON, dynamic, escaped, properly formatted, and validated. And then once you do that, your schema should become very reliable and hands-off. So this slide shows exactly how our schema pipeline works in practice. We're looking at the same schema kind of in two different stages. On the left is what we write inside of Cascade using Velocity. And on the right is actually what gets rendered in the browser and parsed by search engines. So you're seeing this template layer where the code is maintained by the developers, where we're setting those variables for Cascade fields, and we're pulling in things like headline and page URL and then publish date. And then we're also looking at some of those hard-coded values as well that you could always have, like school name, for example. You'll also notice here that we're using those escape tools to sanitize the content, then prevent any bad characters for HTML or quotes from breaking the JSON. And then over to the right, you can see that this is the final rendered output. No variables, no velocity, no conditions, just clean JSON. So again, we're really just looking at how can we create really dynamic schema using the velocity code and what Cascade is outputting. And I'm going to hand it back over to Andrea now to talk a little bit more about valid schema.
All right, so now that we've gone through at a high level what schema is, why it's important, and then Keana did the deep dive into implementation, it's important to mention that just because you can doesn't mean you should. So you really need to avoid schema spam. Schema spam is either exaggerating details, misrepresenting, overusing markup. Um, you just because the data exists for the site doesn't necessarily mean it should be in schema. Schema can start to become bloated, and when everything starts to become bloated, it becomes less meaningful and also harder to maintain. Um, Other markup mistakes, marking everything as a rich type. Big no-nos are putting in fake or exaggerated reviews. FAQ abuse, which would be pages that are just ridiculously long FAQ, question and answer style content that really doesn't apply or make sense for what you do or trying to educate people on. Making the same entity multiple times, or sorry, marking the same entity multiple times. So having basically repeated schema, um, or over marking internal elements. So, you know, the way to really look at it is you've got the page, and the page obviously exists for a reason. Define that reason, and then that goes into the kind of schema that you should see on that page. And then some tools that we use to review and or validate schema are these two. I mean, these are kind of the ones we use exclusively. So schema.org has a validator tool where you can actually drop in your JSON and it will validate it and show you issues. And this can be done before it's even added to a site. My team uses this a lot, especially as we're handing schema off to other teams that perhaps don't have, or we don't have direct access to the CMS, and we need to send off that JSON file to developers. We use this to make sure it's validated so that we're not sending any errors through. If the page already has schema on it, or if you want to audit a page to see what schema it does have, the Google Rich Result tool is a really, really good one. It will tell you what is validating, what's there. Even if it's there and it's got errors, it'll give you that too. And this tool is you just drop in a URL and it'll parse that URL and tell you what's present. So between these two, this will be enough to either test something you've created that's not live yet or test what's live and really get a good understanding of how it's working or how it's not working. All right, so to kind of wrap things up with just some takeaways and next steps, when you're starting to plan out the attack, you really want to focus on the high impact, high priority pages. So that's the home page, program pages, admissions pages, FAQ pages. This applies really for anything that I talk about for SEO or GEO. It's always the high impact, high priority pages first, the ones that are really prospective student audience facing. Those are the ones that you want to attack first. Next is really looking at accuracy and consistency to connect schema across the site. You really want to look at this as a site-wide tool, and it's most powerful when there is consistency. So a lot of what Keana went over is really putting it into a structure that you can power with dynamic values, and that's talking to the consistency point. Um, Integrating schema into the content SEO workflows. If there's schema that is not driven by background data, or if you're creating a content page and they should have FAQs, that kind of needs to be in the workflow when you're planning and writing content about, okay, well, we need certain things to be, more or less snippetable, like a small chunks, easy things for AI engines to grab and show as in a result. That's part of the workflow when it comes to planning the content and writing the content. And then ongoing testing and optimization as best practices change. We kind of touched on the frequency that AI models put out new versions or update versions, which is pretty frequently. So just staying up to date on the best practice changes. Luckily, when it comes to schema, the models changing doesn't really impact or change how you do schema. The thing to know, though, is that there are new schema types that come out. And so making sure that you're up to date on that is really where the time is best spent. Just making sure that you're up to date on the new schema types that are being released, so that you can use it to the fullest potential in your content. And then schema.org is basically a huge library of all the schema types, and that you can use with explanations for them, as well as the schema validation. So that is going to be schema validation. So that is going to be the center point to getting down to, if you want to, try some very custom use cases outside of the ones that we went over today. Schema.org is your full library of all of the schema types out there that you can implement. And I'll also say too, and I was remiss earlier, the Bruce Digital Wave presentation, it's called AI Has Changed How Students Search. Is your website ready? We really do recommend going to check that out. It does a deeper dive on the content piece. It's a good sister presentation to ours if you're really looking to get more information on schema. And if you came to our presentation from Bruce's presentation, we're happy to have you. So I guess now we can open the floor for questions. And, thank you for joining us today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending this amazing presentation. At this time, we are going to open up the floor for questions. I see that some of you have used the Q&A feature. Everyone's starting to get used to the conference, hopefully. And we have quite a few questions to get through. We have roughly 5 minutes, so I'm going to invite Andrea on stage, as well as Keana, and they are going to help answer a few of these questions, and we'll see if we can get through as many as possible. And once again, I am Kyle Merrill, the performance marketing specialist for Hannon Hill, and also the conference manager. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at conference@hannonhill.com if you're experiencing any type of issues. But thank you so much, Andrea and Keana. Let's go ahead and get to some of these questions. You have a highly engaged audience, so we'll start with the most upvoted question. We'll kind of work our way down. But for the first question, we have, after you implement schema, do you track the effectiveness of it to know if you're getting delivered, results? Yeah.
So I'll take that one, and firstly apologize. I'm on while traveling, so there may be some background noise. So I will try to mute myself when it's not my turn to speak, to spare everyone anything you might be hearing. But this one is for me. So this is a really common question for everyone, and it is a black box right now. There are no really great tools that measure the performance, either the impressions, the clicks, what is being delivered as far as URLs, what the prompts are. So this is an issue that everyone that is on the web has right now. I will say a couple of things that you can do is, one, Google Analytics will give you data on traffic coming from ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini. They will pass that sort of medium information through. So the volume is small, but that at least gives you the first look at how many people are getting to your website from those sources. Then another thing that you can do is Google Search Console, which is used to report on how your domain is surfacing in Google searches. So how many times it's delivered for searches, what queries, how many times it clicks. It doesn't have a schema, or sorry, a AI specific area, but if you go into queries and you filter for really, really long queries, 9 times out of 10, what you're seeing are Google searches that are using the AI overview or the AI mode to do that. It's not explicitly telling you it's AI. It's more like an inference. That's a good place to start to see what queries people are searching for, and that are coming to your site's being served for those. But outside of those two, this is really not a well thought through and well organized and well put together tool yet. Like there's no tools that do it. Some tools are out there, like SEMrush is one that we use a lot. They have something in there that we've explored but haven't really bought off on yet to measure. So this is really something, it's interesting because digital marketing and measurement is usually something that people are used to getting the numbers for, and they make decisions off those numbers. And this is the exact opposite. We're kind of going in blind, knowing that it's something that we need to do, but having no way to measure what's happening, the effectiveness, and where we need to spend time. And it's just like that for everyone right now. I'm not sure if that'll ever change, considering what the AI models do and how they're all very fragmented and not centralized. But right now, the best case scenario is just getting educated on the things that matter for Schema and putting those in place and following SEO best practices, and knowing that gets you enough information to know that you're doing the right things, because it also feeds into SEO, which AI is basically closely related to. So if you're not doing well on SEO, then you can pretty much assume you're not going to get succeed on AI.
Thank you so much for answering that question, Andrea. And I think we may have time for one more. Our second most popular or most upvoted question is from April. For those of us with no internal IT staff, what tools are available in Cascade to implement schema markup? I partially feel that maybe some of our team members could answer some of that in the chat. But does anyone want to give that one a shot on your team?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, if Hannon Hill can provide some additional insights in the chat. I think that one of the things that we have found is typically it is CMS administrators or vendors that are helping out to set up those initial templates or blocks. And then after that is set up in Cascade, like we showed the structured data field or being able to connect some things in Velocity, then a lot of that you can handle just through your data definition and content entry process if you're able to set it up dynamically.
Okay, excellent. Well, it looks like we are out of time. Really sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. However, I believe that we have Andrea and Keana's information in the session itself. I see that there's some information that was shared in the chat. I also pinned Bruce's session that was mentioned a couple of times in the presentation. It is AI has changed how students search. Is your website ready? That takes place tomorrow between 3:10 p.m. Eastern time to 4 p.m. So we hope to see you back tomorrow. And I want to encourage everyone, even though this session is ending, I want to encourage everyone to attend the next session. So we have full steam ahead, creating a digital master plan that starts at 1:45, as well as HT access to data definition, my journey to easier URL management. So we want to thank everyone here, including our speakers and presenters, for joining us today. And of course, thank you all for attending this session, and we hope to see you at the next session. Everyone take care. All right, bye-bye.